So my name is Amber Hiscott, and I work as a painter, a sculptor and an architectural glass artist, and I'm based in Wales, and I spend part of my time in Swansea, where I keep most of my glass, and part of my time up in North Wales, near Llangollen, where I usually do my works on paper and painting. Initially, after leaving school, I travelled for a year in Europe and North Africa and the Middle East. And I became fascinated by going into cathedrals like Notre Dame and Chartres. I can remember, for instance, going into the modern building in the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. And there were Marc Chagall windows there. And I was incredibly impressed by those. But I didn't think I could actually do something like that. It seemed so distant, so remote. And then I went to Essex University to start a degree in fine art theory. And I thought what I wanted to do was write about art because I was really good at writing and I liked art. And that would have been quite a good career, but there was something not quite. I don't think I wanted to be so much in my head. I wanted to be more in my heart and my body. And as it happened, my mother became ill, and I came back to Swansea to care for her. And I was given a year off from the university, and during that time, as she got better, I took drawings into the art college. And they said, well, you should be in the glass department. There's so much colour in these drawings. And so I just tentatively began to do the stained glass course for just a few days a week until my mum got better. And as soon as I made my first window, I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. So I was very lucky to have found what I really wanted to do. Initially, my excitement for working in glass was to do with working with mouth-blown glass, because all the stages of making mouth-blown glass means there'd be minute bubbles in it, or amazing textures, or amazing colour, and that the way that catches the transmitted light and it passes through it. And that was my initial fascination. But then as you carry on working and exploring different ways of working with glass, it still comes back to light. And I think that's probably a big part of the fascination. Recently, I've just taken work to Belgium, and I've upcycled the planks that I used in Tunnel of Light and made something called fencing with light, which is installed three sort of rather tall fences. They're not really fences anymore. They're like walls of glass, if you like. They're taller than me. And the way that, as the light moves around, it ignites and sets fire to these planks of glass, which I've painted with stain previously. And it's still that quality of light that fascinates me. Well, I'd worked very hard in college because, I realised it was such a great thing to do, and there was so much potential for it as a contemporary art form. And because concomitant with doing that, I was working in experimental theatre, ritual theatre, and as a consequence had been offered a show in Edinburgh Fringe. And so I went there immediately after leaving college, took about 8 panels that I'd made and took it up there and had a solo show up there. And it was extremely successful. So that was really the starting point. And what was to become the Crafts Council had sent a talent scout who spotted me, encouraged me to apply to the Crafts Council in London for setting up grants and first workshop grants, which I got. which enabled me to work and to set up a studio in Gloucester Place in Swansea. And I was also benefited from Neil Rees, who was the town clerk at Swansea City Council at that time, and he loved art. And he was really, not exactly a benefactor, but he really helped me. And so it was an ideal opportunity to have a really good working space and have commissions. It was the upstairs of an old Seamen's chapel. It's now part of the Mission Gallery. It's the upstairs of the Mission Gallery, but it had a great barrel vaulted roof. They put some skylights in for me. It didn't have a huge number of windows, but it had a strip of windows that was fine to put a glass easel against. And it had enough height that I could have quite big works there. So in 81, 82, I did the Liberty Canopy for Regent Street, and I did windows for Unilever headquarters, which is just over Blackfriars Bridge. So a lot of big work, quite serious work was done there. It was a rather cramped staircase, but it's amazing what you can get up, even a cramped staircase. And because stained glass is demountable, it comes in panels, that made it possible. Later on, as I was working with bigger pieces of float glass, for screen printed enamel, for instance, it became trickier. But there was a whole phase when I worked on float glass with sandblasting and staining and glace applique, because I was always pushing forward the medium. I'm very interested in I don't like doing a new technique just for the sake of it, but if it's appropriate to the concept and the theme, then that's perfect. So for instance, I made, much more recently, I made a window for Geraint Talvin-Davies and Elizabeth Talvin-Davies in Cardiff, and they had met on a school trip it was to commemorate 50 years of being together, and they'd met on a school trip to a waterfall. So I went to see the waterfall, and because that was right up my alley, did a whole set of work about that. But as I was drawing behind the waterfall, I slipped, dropped my sketchbook into the water, had to sort of clamber down desperately, risking life and limb, was drenched and had to walk back quite a few miles to the car. As I was driving back, I thought, I'll use water jet cutting because it seemed entirely appropriate. So, yeah, that's an example of what just comes in intuitively. So this is a little sample from the Talvin-Davies window. So basically this has been cut with the water jet cutter, and then I've placed the two pieces back together. The hole has been glued to the float glass behind, and there's float glass in front. So it's actually a double glazed unit. And there's no way even the best glass cutter in the world could do that just by hand with a glass cutter. So in this case, it seemed entirely appropriate to me to use the water jet cutter, because it tied in with the whole concept. My work, whether it's for a large commission or a private client, ultimately it's what I would like to see in that space. So I think, well, if I owned this building, if I was the director, what would I like to see? And often I'm bringing in natural forms because I love the natural world and thrive on being out in it. So in North Wales, I spend a lot of time walking on the hills. I like to walk on my own because it gives me a chance to really think. And I love to draw. I love to draw what I might pick up or what I'm seeing, and to paint. So I have loads of paintings, but some of them are done specifically for a commission and some are not. And some of them just seem to be appropriate. It almost happens intuitively. So what I would do then is take a painting and I will look at it carefully and see if there's an area that is appropriate to be made into glass, or maybe the whole thing or just a section of it. And then I'll think about how can that be made into. I don't immediately know, because I like to keep that sense of not knowing in some crazy way, even though I've worked in this medium for a long, long time. Obviously, I have ideas about how it could be made, but I always like to experiment first off. And this term stained glass is a very interesting one. It's actually a misnomer. When people say stained glass, they think of a leaded coloured window. The term stain actually refers to a technique that was discovered in the 14th century, and it's the application of certain things like silver nitrate to the glass, and it's fired in. And it's not an enamel, it's integral, it goes into the glass structure. So in my MA, I became fascinated by this and discovering other more unusual, rare staining recipes. I was helped by a man called Ian Wilson, who had been a chemist and a physicist, and he happened to be doing his MA at the same time, and he had done a lot of research. So all these kind of things feed in. So in Tunnel of Light, I was referencing Paviland Cave, where I'd done drawings. And, to draw there, you can only do it at low tide. So you have to, as the tide gets lower, you climb into the cave. And then I would keep drawing and drawing. And in the end, I had a very precarious route out. So I would had all these paintings and drawings. And then I had the idea of painting on the glass in a very free, expressive way, and making this tunnel of light that you could pass through or sit within. And then I also commissioned someone who was a sound artist to record the sounds in the cave, to compose some music related to it. So it was a complete package in the end. So there's a part of me that likes to really, to work in a very experimental, theatrical way. So this table was a part of a series that was initially commissioned by the Guild of St. George, who are an organisation who carry on the work of Ruskin and his ideas. And they have a centre in the middle of the Wyre Forest. And I went to this piece of land that had been given to Ruskin during his lifetime, which is full of very tall, straight oak trees. And I was looking for some way of working there. So I did a lot of drawing, walking around. Then looking through the trees, I saw this amazing yellow glow, which was the clearing around where the buildings were. And they were glowing through the trees. And so then I came back to Swansea and decided to make this table based on this idea. And because it's from the Wyre Forest, I call it Down to the Wyre. And it's a piece of float glass, which has been polished all round. And then I've painted on it with my own recipes of stain, and then fired it in the kiln. And it's supported by oak legs made by Guy Wilson from West Wales. And there's a mirror down at floor level facing upwards. So you can peer into it. You can peer into the mirror. You can peer into the table. And it works in a wonderfully layered way, just as when you peer through a forest, you look through layers of leaves. I work very site-specifically. And if the site already exists, then I'll go to see it. I'll even, for instance, in a private house that I was working for many years ago, when the house was a building site, I went and camped in the garden to get that sense of place. If the building isn't in existence, then I pore over the plans and do the same kind of thing and still think about why that building is there, who's going to use it, its function, the way the light works with the building, and the intention of the architect. So, for instance, if I'm working for a city like Bradford or Manchester, I will go there and spend several days and try and find out something that is intrinsically different about that city. So I'm not interested in just bringing in work that could go anywhere. It has to have a connection. The Millennium Centre project was a fascinating one. The architect is Jonathan Adams. He designed the Wales Millennium Centre. And I thought a lot about the fact that this centre, though it's in Cardiff, represents and is a focus for the whole of Wales. So I thought I wanted to do something that would bring in many different parts of Wales in a way. There were certain things that needed to be done anyway. For instance, there are great big glass windows that wrap around the building. And there's always a danger that someone walking from bright sunshine into a darker space might walk into float glass. So float glass it always needs to have a manifestation. And the simplest thing is they just put some dots or something to stop people walking into it. But my idea was to do drawings in various parts of Wales where the horizon line meets the sky. So where the sky kisses the horizon line around Wales. And I went to many different places in Wales to do these drawings. I climbed Arbennig Vawr with my scrolls in my backpack and ink and sat at the top of Arbennig Vawr and drew it in ink, the horizon line all the way around. It looks like sandblasting, but it's called an acid etch. It's a plain white line. It's very quiet, but it does stop people walking into the glass, and you can see many different parts of Wales when you look at it. That's quiet. When you go into Wales Millennium Centre, there's something that's much more exuberant. It's what I call colourful, and it's based on the waterfall at Pistich Rhaiadr, which is the tallest waterfall in England and Wales, and it's exhilarating to go there. So I wanted to do something that was really, really exuberant and exhilarating, and that wasn't going to necessarily work if it was just colourless. So I've worked with screen printed enamel, and it's on 3 stories. You can walk round and see it in many different ways. And that pleased me because actually with a Pistich Rhaiadr, if you're very brave, and I am quite brave, you can climb behind the waterfall. I probably don't advise it for people who are a bit shaky on their pegs, but you can actually get behind the waterfall. And that's an exhilarating experience. So that's what I was trying to convey in colour. So this panel is going to Oklahoma City next week. Someone is coming to pick it up who has commissioned it. And she's actually a very old friend. We travelled together for about 11 months between school and university. So I'm calling this panel Joy. And it comes from the painting that I painted first. And it's just really exuberant, really says something about what we were like as young girls, I think, in some odd kind of way. It's going to go in her lounge in her house in Oklahoma City and look out onto the garden. It's still actually in progress. I look as if I'm holding it in an odd way. That's because partly I'm trying to make sure you can't see my hands there, but it's more to do with the fact that this is actually fairly fragile. You never carry a stained glass window like a tray, or else it would drop, it could drop down. And though it's pretty stiff now, because it was maybe 10 days since it was cemented, I'm still treating it with kid gloves to make sure that nothing drastic happens. And if you look at it, You can see there are areas that have been sandblasted. It's mouth-blown glass, and that's the dark blue with the opaque areas. And then there's areas that have been acid etched, which are the dark blue on turquoise areas. And then the pink glass is German opal, which I've had since about 1981 when I did the Liberty Canopy in Regent Street. So this glass has a lot of history to it. My workspace is quite important to me, both in North Wales and here in Swansea. I love to be in a beautiful environment with good light, and I love to be able to go out and walk in Gower or swim and explore, and the same in North Wales. So I always take a sketchbook with me. I might not draw, but it actually, I think what happens is as you get older, you see things even more than you did when you were younger. So I can come across something and that will be a source of inspiration to me. But it's very often somewhere or some experience in the natural world. I've had quite a few career highlights. To choose one is really, really difficult because they're all so different. Sheffield Cathedral Lantern, Royal Exchange Theatre, Wales Millennium Centre, Green Mountain Monastery, and Great Western Hospital, Swindon. And then there's the sculpture. I entered a national sculpture competition, and David, my partner, said, don't bother, they just want sculptors, don't bother. But I won it, and then when I actually won it, they said, well, you've won it, but the landscape architect isn't quite happy with the proposal. They want something slightly different. What I was trying to do was something that was really associated with Bradford. And I was unclear about exactly how to find that connection. But then I went to I went up to my steel manufacturer, the steel artist blacksmith, Alan Dawson in Cumbria. And I thought, Delius, the composer Delius came from Bradford. So I'm going to work on that theme. So I stayed up there, went to the library, listened to Delius, and he was a very ill man, and he'd lived for the spring and the summer when someone would wheel him out in the wheelchair into the sunshine, and he would compose. He had an amanuensis who wrote down the music for him because he wasn't capable of actually writing then. And so I listened to that music and thought, spring, autumn, cycles, and I looked at the site, which was right in front of the law courts, and I thought it has to be something about balance. In the end, what I did is I found a skeleton of a leaf, and I had it made in steel, so you could walk through it. So basically, I made a tent out of two skeletal leaf forms, and then within that, in the middle, on one side, there is a bright green leaf, symbolic of the spring, and that's in mouth-blown stained glass. And then on the other side, there's an autumn leaf, a gold one. So when you walk through it, depending upon where the light is, there's a pool of light that you can stand in, either green or an orangey gold colour. And I was very pleased with the way it worked out. And that basically pretty much began my career as working in sculpture in glass, supported by steel. Well, there's always challenges to being an artist and surviving, because financially it's never going to be easy sailing all of the time. Sometimes you hit the jackpot and you do really well for a few years, and then there might be a period where it's quieter, and you tighten your belt and you live more simply. But I've always had this amazing optimism about things working out. And mostly they do. Even when you get through the hard patches, you realize you really learned something from that. I did teach in Carmarthen Art College for about 7 years, part-time. Prior to that, I had taught in Swansea Art College for a couple of years. I still teach very occasionally now in Germany, in Bildwerk Fraunau, just because I love that opportunity to allow some other people to discover this amazing medium. But of course there were challenges, and I didn't have hundreds of kids. We only had one. I just worked incredibly hard and loved what I was doing. And I think I've been lucky in my lifetime. I've met amazing people who have commissioned me. I think very carefully about every job that I do, every commission, every project. I never do the same thing twice. So I think it's a combination of luck and hard work and